So if you're there too long, you lose your residency even though you have your house?
No, my residence is here. If I am physically in Virginia more than half the year, which is 183 days, I
Tax
have
you.
to pay Virginia taxes.
Okay. Okay.
And what kind of drives me nutty about this is I would happily pay partial year Virginia taxes.
I know. I don't understand why they don't prorate
I'm
it.
not trying to get out of it. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand the logic that I should pay, but it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
They want their money.
they want their money. And so I aim for 150 days in Virginia per year. I'm being very Jewish about this. I'm like staying as, the
This,
wrapping the law in another law so that I never even come close to breaking the
you're
law.
being rabbinical about it, I
I
would say.
am. I was little often ignored fact of my biography is I was a rabbi secretary for a year. At Did you not know that?
No, this is new
Oh,
information. No wonder. So
yes.
this the rabbis always like to stay on this side of this
Yeah,
side
so
of the law.
it was a
Yeah.
conservative shul. I actually think it was like almost Orthodox, you
Mm.
know. It was on Upper 16th Street in DC. There are two synagogues across the street from each other. One is Orthodox, the other is conservative. Gosh, Tifereth Israel was the name of the synagogue. And it was a very socially influential synagogue in the DC area. It's the Carter administration at that time. A lot of Carter administration people went there, like Stu Eisenstadt, prominent journalists. Um, and the rabbi was this, I hate to say this. Let me see. Let me find the best, most neutral way of saying this. Well, I'll just be factual. I'll be factual. I was his secretary, and he did not treat me. My version of it is he didn't really have any warmth toward me in a year until he found out that I was Phi Beta Kappa. And I don't know how that came out that I was Phi Beta. Well, I was graduating, whatever. And and I, was more boastful than I guess. So I told him, and he went, oh, and it's like you could just see like this whole new estimation and value proposition about me was developing in his head.
That's so arbitrary.
And I was like, F you,
Yeah, totally.
Even then, when I was pretty young, I was like, I don't like your values. They're lousy. So
Yuck.
anyway,
You were Catholic then, weren't you?
I was a Catholic, and so this would have been spring of 77. And I continued this job probably another 6 months or so. I'd had it for about a year.
Hmm.
And then I was on my way to going to Georgetown.
That was
How does
before
it?
Carmen realized she was a rabbi.
Yeah, I would have imagined that most secretaries of rabbis would be Jewish as well. How did you end up with that job?
No, they just advertised in the newspaper, there was a one ad, and they had they had a bookkeeper, and then they had two positions. They had the synagogue secretary and then the rabbi's secretary. And neither one of us were Jewish. The other one, Robin, I think her name was, was a lady of the world. And and I mean exactly what
That
you think
sounds, yeah, that
I,
sounds.
I mean by that. And she
She was in
she
Phi Beta Kappa too.
no, she was not Phi Beta Kappa.
See, these biases are everywhere.
Exactly. And she was I remember once, I wish I could remember the details because I know it's a spicy story and may even have been a preview of my CIA career because she sends me, I'm at work and she goes, "Can you go to McLean for me?" Because, and this is where the details are murky, but how I remember it is she desperately needed either to deliver something to McLean or to get something back from McLean. just downtown McLean. And she couldn't get away, so I was sent off. And I remember thinking, I'd never been to McLean before. It was like a whole other world, you know?
Mm.
So anyway,
Do you think the audience realizes that the CIA is in McLean?
no, I don't, well, perhaps not. Yeah,
Maybe
but
If
maybe
she
not.
said go to Langley, I think it would have been more.
yeah, I mean, McLean, I guess technically it is Langley. Is Langley even an incorporated
I don't
address?
know.
Langley is its own place on Google Maps.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, so it's like the place where the George Bush Center for Intelligence is.
Oh, okay, Langley, Virginia. And
Yeah.
but McLean is the little business high street, really. And there's a place there called the McLean Family Restaurant that was all family restaurants are Greek owned. Any restaurant in America that has
Oh,
the
except
word,
unless they're Italian.
okay, maybe Italian, that has the word family in it, my experience is it's Greek owned. And um, so everybody went there for if they went out for lunch, that was the fastest lunch. And they had heroes and souvlaki and things like that. You went there, Mark.
What's that?
You went there.
Yeah, I've been there a time or two.
Yeah, exactly.
Not for a
So,
while though. Not for a while.
yeah.
Mark, what brings you to our little conversation about everything?
Well, that's a good question. We have to ask Carmen that one.
Well, we were having a great conversation the last time I saw you about all things spirituality
Mm.
and uh
And
I,
meaning,
and meaning exactly. And I was fascinated by the fact that you had been Mormon, or is that correct that you're no longer Mormon?
I am Mormon in the same way if I grew up Jewish and that was my
Yeah,
heritage.
yeah. Okay, Mormon is very cultural, and
Mhm.
I spend way too much time watching YouTube channels devoted to religion topics, both people in religion, people out of religion. And I have to say, one of the very best of those channels is called Mormon Stories,
Mm.
where they do long form interviews, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours with
Wow.
uh, Mormons, either, they call them progressive Mormons or ex-Mormons. And to me, it's just fascinating to listen to how they grapple with this concept of a religious structure in their lives. And it's really a structure in the Mormon church. It's
Mhm.
I think particularly real brick and mortar kind of thing. And then the question of meaning, and then what happens when they leave, and then and I'll stop talking because I've been doing all the talking so far. I I'm fascinated always by the ability for people to have faith. Uh, I think that points to something else in the human condition, but I'm not sure what that points to.
Mm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and um, and so a lot of times people who lose their faith are just struggling with everything. So that's one reason why I thought you would make a good panda. Two, you had a cup of tea at the CIA. Three, I think you have an interesting post CIA career.
When you say cup of tea, is there a way to translate that?
I mean, aren't you familiar with when you spend a short amount of time at a place?
Oh yeah, I am. But I mean, like, do we get to talk about how long that was and what that
Sure.
story
I
is, or
mean,
is
it's
that
up to
not? Are
Mark,
we are we
but
not
but
allowed
I
to?
would imagine we can talk about it.
Happy to talk about anything. Yeah, I was
Okay.
there 7 years, so a little while, but not like Carmen or anything like that. I have a funny story about Carmen. So Carmen wouldn't have remembered me because she was a bigwig when I started there. But as we would, I saw her in meetings when she would welcome all the new recruits and we would graduate from our training and she would get us all excited and stuff. And I was always impressed by Carmen's sort of authenticity and outside the boxness and just I like how she thinks and whatnot. And I like that she's a person in power in this organization that says something good to me. But I remember like a personal connection I had with Carmen was I was going through a review process. I don't know if it was a PDB or what it was, but for some reason Carmen had to look at it.
And what office were you in?
I was in APLA working on Korea.
Okay,
Korea.
hold on.
Okay.
PDB, Presidential Daily Brief.
Sorry. President's Daily Brief and
President's
APLA
Daily
was
Brief.
Asia
Okay.
Pacific.
Okay.
Yeah, and Latin America. So you remember when everyone would wear Live Strong bands?
Yes.
Remember these?
Yes. Oh,
So
yes.
I pulled this out for little show and tell, but I also had a red one on. This one I pulled out of the bag. I hadn't worn it. This was for ALS. And so I had these on my wrist because, hey,
For ALS?
yeah, it was for
Yeah.
ALS. And so Carmen, I'm up there doing my review, and then she starts asking me about these bands. Well, what's the red band? Tell me about that and stuff like that. So she was just someone interested in the individual and curious about people. So I just really, I really appreciate that about you.
Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate you telling me that story, which of course I don't remember, but
Sure, of course. Yeah.
it's not because you're not memorable. It's
I
Because,
think it's,
because my memory sucks.
well,
well,
but it says, sorry.
I wouldn't remember it either, but it's sort of one of those, it shows how we have little experiences and we impact people and we don't even realize we're doing it. And
Exactly.
all these good things we do, we think, I had no impact today. What did I do? And we may have impacted 5 people along the way and not even known it.
Exactly. Exactly.
And by
Well,
the way, Julia, one thing that impacted me when I first met you on email was you signed your emails love Julia.
I do.
And I'm thinking, who does that? I've never seen anyone sign love. But at the same time, I thought, well, how cool is that? Like she's just sending me love already, you know?
yeah. Yeah.
So, and as I've listened to more of your podcasts, I realized that is who you are, right? It's all about bringing love in and things like that. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, my
Thanks.
background's all over the place. So I don't know. We could go so many directions.
So
I
how
have
had
to
you
I have to
you go,
briefly
you go.
insert something just
Go ahead.
briefly before we go on, which is your comment, Mark, about how it made you feel about the organization that Carmen was in leadership. Um, in two ways, it sort of seems to me. So one is that a really positive vibe that the organization decides that diversity of thought is powerful enough and important enough to have this person. And then so to have a bunch of diverse thinkers in leadership, and then two, that in particular they thought a part of diversity of thought should be someone like Carmen, who is not typical of your executive intelligence people, I would think.
Hmm. Yeah,
True?
yeah,
I mean, I think that's true, right?
yeah. I think
Non-typical?
so. Yeah,
Yeah,
always pushing us to think in new ways and be, outside the box, which I think we needed.
yeah.
And I say that as a low level person, but that was just my observation. I'm sure Carmen would know way better than I would.
Well, yeah, it's always a challenge to get people to sort of ask the question. Well, it's a challenge for all of us to ask the questions we don't think of asking.
Hmm.
And that's.
By the way, Carmen, you said something about what you kind of had an implied question in a comment you made about religion and what pulls us toward that.
Yes, right.
And one thought that I've had is that as humans, we have this just immense insecurity. We know we're going to die. We don't know what's going to happen. And we're vulnerable just before we die, right? If we're not in groups, what's going to happen to me? If I don't have someone there when I get sick, what might happen to me? If I don't have someone when I'm a kid, no one's going to feed me and things like that. And so I think that religion provides all these answers that we want, and it gives us a sense of certainty because otherwise it can be scary to think, well, who's going to tell me what I'm supposed to do and who's going to tell me what's going to happen and things like that. So religion, that's just one level of what religion provides. But I think when it does it well, it just gives people a sense of, oh, okay, I can
Yes.
now worry about the rest of life because I don't have to worry about what's going to happen when I die.
Yeah, and spirituality is somewhat different than that because at least some spiritual paths are really about the mystical path, and the mystical path is actually about uncertainty
Mm, mm,
and being open enough, like realizing that there's something beyond us and being open enough to have a connection with it. And you're sure of that, but
mm,
you're not necessarily sure of anything else, right? Like you're not necessarily sure of the rules that that implies or the meaning that that should impart for anyone else except for you, maybe.
Hmm.
So I just
You-
think that this is how spirituality and religion have kind of come to mean different things,
hmm.
but there's this real close interplay.
Do you think within that spirituality, there's a certain sense of deep okayness, even if you don't have all the answers?
If you're on the mystical path, I think so, right? If you're on the mystical path, I think the only way you can tolerate being on the mystical path because there's so much uncertainty is if you have a deep knowing of one thing, like the universe is love, or there is a God, or which to me are the same thing, or or I know that God is good, or something like you have sureness in one thing, so that then you can sample all this other space and go on a journey in that way. I forget the question.
Do you think that sureness is ever I know there's the feeling of sureness, but can we ever really feel, if we're being honest with ourselves, that we are really sure?
Yeah, so I think that it depends on the person and their circumstances and their time of life. And so if you read some of like Teresa of Avila's stuff, she talks about the cloud of unknowing,
Hmm.
the dark night of the soul. So there are these um sort of known mystical there's a known mystical developmental timeline for mystics, I guess. And you go through a period generally where you're unsure. And then what comes back is like one piece of clarity from which you can navigate. So I think
Hmm.
that's all part of it.
Hmm.
Now, do you think that all religious slash spiritual traditions, I'm even tempted to throw in the word anthropological there or cultural. Do you think they all have a mystic vein the way you've described it? And let me just say what I thought as I was listening to you. Clearly, the Jewish tradition has a very strong mystic vein. As you mentioned, the Catholic tradition has a very strong mystic vein. Buddhism seems to me essentially a mystic vein. Don't know enough about Hinduism. Clearly, a lot of the much earlier religious traditions, animists or whatever, have these mystic veins. But I just ask myself, does Protestantism really have a mystic vein, or is there something kind of industrial revolutionary about Protestantism that I mean, I think I must be wrong in what I'm saying, that there are Protestant mystics, but it's a weak tradition among in the post-Reformation spiritual religious groupings. So that would be my assertion.
Yeah. So like the Mennonites, I would consider a
Uh,
mystical
yeah, yeah,
Protestant
sticks.
sect.
Hmm.
But what did they have to do? Separate themselves out? Actually, the Pope died, by the way, today.
I know I saw that. I was very
Hmm.
sad
That just
because
came into my mind.
I did
Um,
like this Pope a lot.
Yes.
same. Same.
Yeah. And so, but so definitely, I mean, like, sorry, that just came into my head,
Yeah,
um,
no.
but the Mennonites had to separate themselves out to sort of be mystical. And I kind of see what you're saying. I mean, Islam certainly has mystical.
Oh, of course, Islam. Yes,
Yeah,
the Sufis. I mean, they have strong mystic traditions.
yeah,
The Ismailis.
the
Yeah,
Baha'i. Yeah,
yeah.
but in Protestantism almost seems like a reaction to mysticism. Like we're going to
Yeah.
clean all this up. Like this is messy. We're going
Yes,
to
we're going
clean
to
it
have
all.
rule based, and we're going to give you a procedure, and your outcome is going to be guaranteed.
Almost like there is no mystery. Here's the answer. There is no mystery. And in Catholicism, you go to a Catholic church and they have this one prayer where they declare the mystery of the Catholic faith. I mean, it's like we're declaring this as a mystery. Um, you don't have that kind of language in Protestant. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about Mormonism? Or Mark, are you open to talking about that? Or what are your thoughts?
In which way? I mean,
I'm just worried that we're treading too close to home. I don't know what your story is about leaving
hmm,
Mormonism and how
hmm.
much you are open to talking about it, um, because it can be very personal. And so I don't know if we're getting too abstract
No, I mean,
or
I think
personal.
Mormonism gave me my native tongue to think about my place in the universe, the purpose of life, why we're here. And in many ways, even though I deconstructed so many elements and I dove into the history and found so many things disturbing and now have issues with the faith and how it's practiced or the structure or whatever it may be, I find great beauty in it and great value in it. And my family is in it. You know, my kids are in it. My parents, my sisters, everyone's in it. I have a son who's on Mormon missionary in Spain right now. You know,
Oh,
so
wow. Well, what a great place he got.
yeah, he got lucky. I couldn't have asked for a better place for him, honestly. So I find great value in it, but I think it's it's helpful to talk to if you're talking to an active believing Mormon, you know, they want ideally to convert you, not necessarily, they're not doing it in any kind of you know, they love you and they love their religion and they think everyone should ultimately come into that faith because they believe it's Jesus Christ's faith. And, you know, this is the way we should all be. But for me, I can look at it kind of as an outsider who was an insider who can see all the nuance and all the details of it. So for me, it gave me things like the sense of always wanting to grow and to have something bigger to look forward to of eternally growing and becoming and just there's some essence of that that just feels really good, right? So if I were to ever go to a heaven that was sitting on clouds and playing harps and just loving each other, but not doing anything, that would get boring, right? After a while, it's like, well, okay, what am I going to do next? I've done this for 1,000 years. Now what, you know?
Yeah.
So I think the idea of growth and challenge and community and us being all kind of the family of God and all interwoven and interconnected together, to me, that's it's amazing and beautiful. So I love so many ideas of it. And now I build my own beliefs without anyone telling me you must believe this or these are the rules that you must follow, you know? So it's more of what resonates within me, you know, almost like a frequency. If that feels true to my soul, then I want to follow that. So if it's love or kindness or service, I mean, those are all things Mormons teach, you know, and other Christians teach and other faiths teach as well. So I often look at all these quote unquote kind of eternal principles that are taught throughout all religions and non-religions and all kinds of groups. And I think what resonates, and those are kind of the things I want to try to latch onto rather than worrying, did I keep this commandment or rule or, you know, did I do all
Now,
the things? Yeah.
did you grow up in Utah or where did you grow up?
No, I was a Navy brat. I grew up all over. My dad was Navy
Yeah.
and airlines. So we lived all over. We lived in Iceland for a little while during
Oh, nice.
remember the Reagan Gorbachev summit? I was in
Oh, sure,
Iceland at
in
that point.
Reykjavik,
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
wow. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
So yeah, I lived all over. My parents were converts to the faith. Yeah, and so I had, you know, I was a Mormon missionary in Australia for 2 years, and I worked with the Vietnamese community there. So I saw Eastern thought and Eastern ideas about religion, and I was trying to make sense of it with Western ideas. You know, to me, Western religion is very much black and white, right? If this thing conflicts with that, one must be true and one must be false, right? And so I would often think about what are the assumptions we're making about God? You know, oh well, God is a God of truth. So this is these things, these both can't coexist, you know. And I realized that in Eastern tradition, it was all roads lead to Rome. You know, God is working in all these ways to help us. And so I started thinking about the values like, is God a God of goodness? Is good the most important thing for God, or is becoming and growth and development more important if there's a God, you know? And I sometimes use the analogy of like elf on the shelf or Santa Claus, motivating children to be good and kind to each other. Well, elf on the shelf we know isn't exactly real, but if it motivates siblings to be kind and to love each other and to be good for Santa, there's good fruits out of that, you know? And so if I were God, and I think my goal would be to have children who grow and develop and become better versions of themselves, and I would probably use all the tools that I had rather than necessarily saying, there's only one way you can do it, and if you don't do it this way, you know, sorry for you. So I just think about a lot of those things, but to me, as I've moved farther along the path, I used to want to change people to make them more like me. I know, Carmen, you love to talk about that. We want to, you know, control others, and I wanted to sort
Yes.
of convert others to what I believed. And now I'm realizing that if something is bringing beauty to someone else's life, then I just want
Right.
to let them have that
Right.
thing. So if
Right.
it's beautiful for my son to go on a mission and convert others to, the tradition I grew up in, and I don't necessarily believe in it the way he does or my others do in my family, that's okay. I don't need to change them anymore.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah, I have a dear cousin who lives 4 miles from me in Texas, and I mean, I love her fantastically, and she's definitely on the very short list of the best-hearted people I know. Of course, yesterday was Easter, and she wanted me to go to church with them and their guests, and they're, some kind of evangelical Protestant, and so first they invited me to brunch, and then they said, well, before brunch, we're going to church if you'd like to come. And I'd say, no, thanks.
mm,
And you can see the disappointment in her face. Um, that's one point. The other point is I would never want to do anything that would make her less secure in her faith.
mm,
Never, because that is so powerful for her and her well-being that it would be like a cruelty for me to do anything like that, I feel.
mm, hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Julia, I don't know your faith tradition.
Oh, I grew up Unitarian, which is essentially like atheist. I'm sorry. It's sorry to all the Unitarian Universalists. It's
Isn't
a
that
it's
all
a
roads lead to Rome, kind of?
it's a secular humanist tradition. There's not a lot of talk about God, and there's a lot of intellectualism. So, a lot of talking about how God is like the opiate of the masses, and people don't actually have to believe in God to be a good person, etc. Very secular humanist. It drove me a little nuts. I was raised by very academic people, but my mom was more mystical than my dad. And I started to get a sense of that there was something I was missing, and I was already more mystical as a kid. So I used to have weird. I shouldn't call them weird because they're pretty common, but I had mystical experiences as a kid, and it gave me a front row seat to God. And I felt like, okay, I really believe in God because I feel like I
Mm.
have like really connected to God. So that doesn't feel like an optional thing for me. And then when I grew up, I noticed that I was always dating Jewish men, and I ended up learning about Judaism, and then ended up converting because it felt uh, at home. I felt at home there, but I converted in a very liberal tradition, the Reconstructionist movement. And the rabbi, when he found out that I was converting from Unitarianism, he's like, "Why bother?" It's practically a one-for-one trade. I'm like, I know, but I learned a lot. And
It's probably better food.
I mean,
I mean,
my
I
mom's a
somehow
pretty good
don't.
cook. My mom's a pretty good cook, but there wasn't a lot of food that's another thing, by the way. Like there's no food, there's no wine. You go to a synagogue and you raise kids within a synagogue, and my son, at age 5 accidentally drinks the wine instead of the grape juice, and that was, he had a delightful evening. So it's a different sort of playfulness. There's a lot of taking things very seriously. And when you don't have God, or you don't have, I'm not even going to say God because I think that Buddhists also do this. When you don't have a recognition that there's power beyond you, you can take yourself very seriously, and it can be, I
Exactly.
think, damaging.
Exactly. Well, one
If
ask. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
Two questions. I'm curious about your mystical experiences as a kid, but two, you said if you don't have the idea that there's a God or something bigger, then you do take yourself too seriously. Is that what you're saying?
You tend to think that you have to be in control of everything, and there's a lot of weight on your shoulders, and you can take yourself too seriously. Like
Mm,
if we don't do something, then horrible things will happen. And it's like you forget that there's a whole rest of the universe that can be operating. So you think, oh, well, this is a problem, and I'm a smart person and I solve problems. And so I have to go do this. And it can cause all sorts of trouble because you don't recognize it's almost like a narcissistic position. You don't recognize that the rest of the universe also exists and has actions and has intent and has ways of being. Even if you don't acknowledge God, you you sometimes fail to acknowledge that other people who are equally powerful, if not more so, exist. And so it feels to me like it's a slippery slope to narcissism.
Hmm. And what about your mystical
Experiences as
experience?
a kid, oh, so many. I mean, like, um, going to bed at night, I would to get my brain to stop spinning because I'd be thinking about things, or I would reading a book I was interested in or something. I would make these hand symbols, like symmetric hand symbols, like this or this, and I would make patterns with them to sort of hypnotize myself into sleep. And sometimes as I was making the patterns, I loved the symmetry of it. I would go into sort of an altered, like it worked, except I didn't go to sleep. I went into, or it didn't feel like sleep. Maybe it was on the way to sleep, right? But I would go into an altered state and I would have like conversations with God. I wouldn't hear voices so much as have a knowing. And I wouldn't even say things so much as have a feelings and thoughts arise. And it, whether you want to call it God or you want to call it love or you want to call it that which is, you know, in the universe or whatever you want to call it, it felt very responsive and very much like full of love and connected. And it's what got me through all sorts of difficulties, including a version of this that I would see. Um, I was in a family that was very intelligent and full of love, but also dysfunctional in many ways. And so my dad had obsessive compulsive disorder, and trigger warning for those who were abused as children. He would take that out on me and floss my teeth and my sister's teeth for like an hour at a time every night. And sometimes he would even tape record it because he was obsessed with obsessive compulsive disorder. He was obsessed with this. Uh, and it was horrible because he
Yeah.
wouldn't stop and he did it for years. But one of the things that got me through that was a version of myself, which I only identified later as a version of myself sitting in the rocking chair near my bed. Like I didn't see it like a hallucination, but in my mind's eye, I felt her there and she was older and she kept saying like, it's okay to be angry. You know, this situation sucks, but you're going to thrive someday.
Mm.
And that was like incredibly powerful. And I don't really know if that actually happened when I was a kid or if later when I went to therapy to deal with it and my therapist had me do time travel therapy and go back, whether I invented that memory, and I don't care because
Mm.
it ends. So our history ends up mattering in its sort of consummate whole, right? And that changes over time, but that how that changes affects our future.
Mm.
And so it's can be very healing to remember a different thing. And maybe I'm not, maybe that did happen. I know that this thing happened when I was a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that other thing maybe could be just a healing memory I have, but it works.
Well, I'm sorry you went through that. I cannot even imagine. I've never liked flossing my teeth, but to have a parent, and to not have control for that.
It's the not having control. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I
And
will.
any other situation where I don't have control over just my physical body, it's a trigger and I've learned how to manage it,
Mm.
but
Mm.
it still causes physiological distress. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, I visit a lot of Protestant faiths, and there's one close here that I like to go to that's a non-denominational kind of church. And even and by the way, Mormons don't like to be called Mormons anymore.
I know.
They
Oh,
want to be
That's
right.
right.
called they want to be called Christians or Latter-day Saints or
Mhm.
members of the Church of Jesus Christ or members of the Church of Jesus Christ or Latter-day Saints. But it's just such a mouthful. When we grew up, there used to be campaigns of I'm a Mormon, and we use the
Yes.
term freely. So I'm going to use that term, but caveat for my Mormon friends so they're feeling
Yes.
respected. But I've had spiritual, what I would describe as spiritual experiences in the Mormon tradition where I felt the love of God. But I've also had it going to this church down the street one time where I prayed and I said, "Hey, I felt kind of betrayed. Like I don't know if I trust because my point earlier was that everything is coming through me as the receptacle of the experience, which means that I'm always interpreting it to mean something based on a story or an assumption that I have about it. Um, and so I think we all do that, but we don't even realize that there's the assumption behind it. but I went to this church and I had been going through a lot of hard things and I was just feeling low and sad. Um, but I just had this overwhelming feeling of the love of God, that God loves me and my, tears are coming down. And luckily it was sort of a dark room because I felt like, self-conscious about it. But that was an experience where I felt that connectedness, that sense of the divine. Now I could say, well, that was God, that God is love. And of course, but I could also say, well, that was me projecting or whatever it is. But I'm okay not knowing. I just know that that felt amazing and it was a sort of a healing experience for me. And, I love that others have those experiences in the Jewish faith or in, whatever it may be. So I don't know.
But you
It's an
do
interesting
know.
topic.
But see, you do know. That's the mystical path. Is like you do know this one thing. You don't have to know some ontological truth
Mm,
about God, but you
mm, mm.
know that you have this experience. The only way we get information is through our experiences. So there's
Yeah.
no other option,
Mm,
right?
right. It's the
And so,
fruits of the thing.
yeah,
But
it's the
two
fruits of the
things,
thing.
if
That's what I think I
to write
know.
them down, I'm
So
gonna
I
forget
know the
them.
fruits. The fruits are
Yes,
good,
yes,
which to me is like by their fruits you shall know them and plant a
right,
seed and all of
right,
that kind of stuff.
right.
So
So you know the fruits of the thing, and that's the core. And then the thing doesn't, for you, have to just be, the Church of Latter-day Saints. It can
mm,
also be another place. In other words, the thing is trans-denominational
yeah,
for
yeah,
you. Yeah.
yeah. Sometimes I think of it like exercise. You may be into yoga, you may be into spin behind you. Some others may be into weightlifting or running, and no one's really arguing about having the true exercise. We're just
Yeah.
saying this exercise is wonderful and I feel great afterwards and I feel better in my body and all the things. And I would love it if religiously we could do that where it's like, I don't know,
Yeah.
but this feels really good and I
For
want to
me,
share it if you want,
Yeah,
but you don't have
yeah,
to.
that's great, a great analogy.
my
So,
husband says, we don't go into a shoe store and have the person say, okay, um, size 9 seems to be working for everyone. So here's your size 9 shoes.
Right? Can you
so
imagine?
yeah, two things came to mind while the two of you were talking. You were talking about how you went to that non-denominational Protestant church and how you had a powerful moment, and you were it was lucky that the space was dark because maybe you had tears, and that reminded me. So there's perhaps you've been to it. There's a chapel in Houston designed by Marc Rothko, the modern artist, and it's like just a black space. Have you been to it,
Hmm.
Mark? It's or Julia?
I'm
It's a
saying yes to keep you going.
it's a black space with just shades of black on black. And I took my mom there maybe, I don't know, maybe 4 years before she died. So she was still pretty ambulatory and everything. And I'd been to the church before, so I knew what to expect because you go in there and it's just you're in a box of darkness with other people. And I go, this is unusual, mommy, but it's world famous. You should see it. So we go in there and she's there about 3 seconds and she just breaks out laughing. She goes, and I gotta scurry her out of there because everyone else in the space is like going, who are you? What's your problem? But my mom's reaction to this as a spiritual experience was mockery. So I don't have a conclusion, but make of it what you will. And then the second thing, I don't know if this is going to make any sense, but I wrote it down, so I'm going to say it out loud to both of you. But when you were talking about think it was you, Julia. You were talking about, God isn't a set of rules. It's like a search, or you said something like that. And that made me think of the early days of the internet when like in the early aughts, when everyone was trying to come up with an ontology or a taxonomy to organize all the information on the internet.
Yes.
I remember talking to people in the early days who were like, they had folders on their desktop and every interesting web page they spent like 5 minutes per web page finding where to slot it in their taxonomy system. And I remember thinking that is a complete waste of time, but not really knowing why I believed it was a complete waste of time. And then eventually it dawned on everybody that you could just search. That you didn't have to have rules and you didn't have to have it all organized. You could just search. And there's
Wow.
something about that which
Yeah.
I'm linking to this religion conversation, although it would unsnap very easily. I'm not exactly sure what my mind is connecting to when it made that comparison.
Oh,
Can
but I
I?
mean, it's so, yeah, sorry. Yes.
No, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, no,
You
you go.
go. Well, I just had a thought that, religion does give you a structure for how to think about everything. And when you lose that, you now lose the foundation that you're built on of all these rules and structures of what everything means. But that is an invitation, I think, to go inward, to tune in, to, lean upward, to figure out what feels right within you. And so I think sometimes religions are so focused on the rules that you never have to do that work. So I think it is a certain self-work that you have to
Oh, I love
struggle
that.
and
Yes.
find, and
Well,
does this feel
yes,
right?
you're right.
And so to me, losing one's faith or progressing through it, I think at some point, growth invites us to at least question the way we've always thought about it. We don't have to lose what we grew up with necessarily, but can I think about it in a more, higher level or deeper way? Or how do I put all this together? Question a little
Yeah.
bit. I
Yeah, I
think that
love that.
invites growth.
Because adopting others entities' rules without doing the work yourself to get to that place is very empty
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
and is likely to be very brittle as well.
Mm-hmm.
You were going to say something, Julia.
Yeah, yeah, no, this is all exciting. It reminds me of when my husband at the time, when I was going through the conversion process, he wanted to go through it with me. He wanted to go to the classes with me
Even though
because
he was already
he was
Jewish?
already Jewish. But when he was a kid, he was learning someone else's rules. He wanted to feel what it was like as an adult. So I think the
Mm,
conversion process is super fascinating because it's an adult thing. And so you upon things differently inside yourself if you're also aware of what's going on inside yourself. And the other thing I wanted to say is the Google search, or the, let's just not particularly point out Google, but the internet search metaphor, not that we already have it, um, is really perfect for the mystical quest because
mm.
you start to notice that all you need do is kind of type it into the search field, which is your intention. Like
Oh,
just
wow. Yeah.
like there's this thing we have inside of us. It's almost like internet search is based on it, where you just say like um right now what I really need is a resource to help my son.
Uh-huh.
That's what I really need. And I don't know how to get it. I don't know how to get the right resource. So God or love or whatever is this thing that my inside is interacting with that's beyond me. Please deliver to me, to my heart, to my mind, to me in some way, through a friend,
Mm.
through a resource of any kind, this thing. And it works. And we shouldn't be surprised that it works, because really what happens in the mystical path is you realize that your insides are connected to the outside. Your insides are connected to the entire universe. I mean, this is the great discovery, right? So we shouldn't be surprised that it works. But because we're so focused on the outside and we think that that's where the action is, um, when that is actually weaker than the effect that the inside has on the universe, um, I think that's why we confuse it. But when you start to recognize that you have that search capacity inside yourself, it's exactly like internet search. It magically appears. You don't
Mm.
have
Yeah.
to know the algorithm even. You don't have
Yeah.
to even develop it. It's just doing it.
I
Yeah.
think I think if you think of us as the children of God, if you think of God's DNA within us, or if you think of us as all part of the universe or part of source, then perhaps all of those answers are already within, and it's a matter of
Mhm.
allowing them out of us or into our heads or whatever. Or maybe they're just all around us and we're already connected to all of it anyway. So it's a matter of
Yeah, well,
tuning
yeah.
there.
Sometimes I often what a ridiculous phrase. Sometimes I often, that's just so ugly. But I think I used the phrase that you have to clear the debris.
Mm.
When you're doing thought work, you have to clear the debris, but it really isn't debris. I don't mean to say that it's trash or not useful. It's just a layer that sits on top of another layer, and because there's a layer on top, you can't see what's beneath it. They may be, they often are of equal value, whatever that means, but they one obstructs the other, right? And so I often use that thing that thought work, you have to do a lot of I I believe we have to do a lot of thought work in our lives. And I believe it just seems to me that so many people just don't even think of the need to do thought work. If it occurs to them briefly, then they fling it out of their minds as quickly as they can. But thought work is just so important and to me it's a happy thing to do. It makes me happy to clear debris so that I can see something else?
Why do you think we avoid it? Or we often sometimes avoid it?
Well, I mean, you started off by talking about how we're fearful, and I think that a lot of people are fearful. What are they fearful of? They're fearful of, well, you said they're afraid of death, but
They're afraid they're not in control.
yeah, maybe they're afraid they're not in control.
I mean, a
Yeah,
lot of
there's
people don't
something
want to
else I want to
connect.
say, but it's
People
not
don't want to,
coming.
sorry.
No, it's just not coming to me. So keep going.
I mean, Mark has a sign behind him that says, "You are enough."
Hmm.
And that's really important because we have this idea of if we find out who we really are deep inside, we'll be in trouble. We better not listen to that. And we're not going to be enough. And so I think it's this fear of not being okay.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you said that, what immediately came to my mind was, well, I am enough.
Yeah.
I'm not like bragging about that necessarily, but it provides me, it sustains me to think I am enough. I'm doing a good enough job of working through things and getting a little, I don't want to say better, although better is part of it, but becoming truer.
Hmm.
I'm doing a good job of becoming truer with each passing year.
Yeah.
And I feel that that's good. That's enough.
Hmm.
And I think what prevents people from having that feeling of contentment, this may be slightly is too strong, but
Life satisfaction is the
yeah,
psychological construct.
satisfaction,
Yeah. Yeah.
People will say, "Are you happy?" And I mean, I am happy, but I'm at peace. I'm peaceful. I am comfortable.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm comfortable while constantly doing this thought work. And so I think I don't know. There must be a group of people. There is a group of people who are only comfortable if they don't have to do any thought work. I don't. I just
No,
sort
and
of
Right.
there's
think,
a group of people who are uncomfortable with thought work. Carmen, it has to do with your, I don't know, Mark, maybe you have an idea on this. It has to do with, I think it has to do with Carmen's just nature. Like some people have just the nature, and you had the upbringing where you felt loved, and you had the nature to say, okay, I'm okay. And I'm the same way, regardless. We've both been through weird stuff, right? And I think Mark's the same way.
yeah,
And so, whatever tools you use to get there, mazel tov. And then there's a group of people who can't get there because of whatever's
yeah,
going on with their nature.
yeah, and that's sad.
Carmen, I might answer your question or the question I asked you. The reflection back on yourself, if you're going to be honest about it, you will probably come to a conclusion that you need to change something about yourself. And that will probably be uncomfortable. And I think as
Yeah,
humans, we really would prefer to be comfortable than uncomfortable.
right.
You know, if it says, oh, I need to have a conversation I've been avoiding, or I need to change this habit, or I need to exercise more, whatever it is, that may require us to do something hard. And so we kind of avoid it, right?
Right.
Um, one thing I found interesting, because I've done yoga retreats and things like that, and I find the language of sort of that yogi, spiritualist, astrological belief. I was listening to someone talk about it, and for her, it was sort of a religion. And I thought, wow, you sound like my Mormon upbringing about growth and becoming and all of these things. And so sometimes I wonder if we are just all trying to tune into something and we're then interpreting it differently and it's becoming all these religions or whatever. But ultimately, there's something that we're trying to tune into that feels true. And then we're interpreting it through our own experiences and it's coming out differently. But I see so many things that we use different words, but whether it's spirit or soul or energy or whatever,
Right.
you see so many parallels and they're all sort of pulling us higher, pulling us to become our better selves, pulling us to love others more. So hopefully it's all coming from a good, loving God who, has some great future for us, but I'm not one to
Yeah.
say anything with certainty.
Yeah, me neither. Me neither.
Well, I
Yeah.
think you have two choices. You could be suspicious of those feelings of love, of universal love when you have them, and then you'll have a miserable life because what else is there? Or you could say, okay, whatever's producing these feelings in me, um, by their fruits you shall know them.
Mm. Enjoy the fruits if they feel like good, healthy fruits, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if you've
Yeah.
been watching Pandas, you know I'm the official timekeeper, and we're at the hour mark.
So we should do like a 5-hour podcast and be like Mormon stories, I guess.
We
Yeah, exactly.
we probably could, absolutely. But I did want to ask you one question, which is what drew you away from the agency, or what attracted you to, were you attracted? Were you repelled? Did something new attract you, or did your existing place?
Hmm. All right, I'll try to answer that question.
Yeah.
I left for family reasons. Honestly, I had 2 kids. I was married at the time, and I couldn't figure out how to get ahead and have a good family life in DC on
Yes.
one
On
salary.
one income, yeah.
Yeah, and my 2.5-year-old at the time, we were visiting Charlottesville with friends, and there was a backyard, and all the kids were playing in the backyard. And he comes up to me and he says something like, "Hey, Dad, when I get bigger and bigger, do you think, can we have a backyard too?" Something like that, right? And of course, as a father, you're just like, oh man, how am I going to do this? And I knew I could commute an hour to work and live in a townhouse without a real backyard. So there was just a sense that I could never get ahead there. Did I love sitting in a cubicle? Did I love, polygraphs and financial disclosures? No, I hated all of that. But I love the work and I love the mission. I love the people. So when I left, I left on LWOP, leave without pay, and I actually came back for a bit and worked remotely. And I mean, if I could have stayed, if they would have said, yeah, live in Austin and do your thing, I probably would have done it. But yeah, it just wasn't an option. So I ended up starting my own business and I've been doing that for the
Well,
past, 12, 13, 14 years, whatever it is
why
now.
not? Why not
Why not films? Yeah.
films? Why not films? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That comes from my mom, by the way. So that's a whole nother story.
Ah, very good. We
I
need to
feel
know.
like you've all made me want to do a podcast so I can have you on to ask you all the questions about your lives and get to know you.
Okay. Well, I think we
So
were
many
having like a
questions.
triangular conversation.
We all talked. This was
Yeah.
about all of it.